main objectives are to define what building forward together really means for a Pan-African civil society. And also our objective is to be propositional to an alternative model and pathway towards Africa and the rule maker being the rule maker and not the rule taker, and what that really means for our continent. On my panel today, we have Mr. Allan Murangira, who's a co-founder and team leader of Youth for Tax Justice Network, a Pan-African youth organization working to create a young and conscious generation of tax justice champions demanding for sustainable resource mobilization in Africa, deployed benefit of the young people on the continent. We've had lots of discussions about how Africa needs to mobilize their own resources. Allan, when we take a look at the numbers, it's quite alarming. UNCTAD says that developing countries require at least $1 trillion in debt relief in the face of COVID-19. In Africa, the number of extremely poor could rise to 514 million people in 2021, keeping in mind that our continent is full of young people, the youngest population in the world, and looking at the narrative of whether this is an opportunity for Africa or whether this actually hinders the economic development of the continent. How do we reconcile this narrative with the bulging debt burden of many African countries?
Thank you very much for the question, and a big thanks to Afredat for putting this together to have us say in one of the most important conversations of this generation, the issue of where we stand as young people on matters of importance like debt, for example. So I think it is Yash Tandon that said that our problem as a continent, and I think that is, and Crystal Masab has alluded to this, is that there are powers, imperialistic powers that have been taking and taking and taking, and I think with the help of some of local agents, mostly political agents, to take away what has been mostly ours in terms of resources, but also in terms of contributions as a continent. So from a young perspective, and I think from the past 3 days, what has clearly come out is that debt, the new debt, especially the one that is not bilateral, or the one that is not gotten through the traditional ways, is having, or is going to have a very big impact on young people. And African Union, I think it was in 2017, came up with this notion of, let us harness the demographic dividend by investing in young people. And we can see that that has not been happening. That has not happened because of issues of not raising enough resources internally as a continent, but also even the little that we've raised is being taken out through frameworks or instruments like debt. Secondly, is that as young people, again, we are being told that there is this sort of, we are expected to, for example, innovate. We are expected to have the necessary skills to improve or to benefit our economies. We are told that, we are the future. We've been told this big narrative of, this is it. But at the same time, realizing that all the resources that we've been having have either been taken out through illicit financial flows or now, as we are seeing, through debt. So for us, it leaves us at a disadvantage. And we've also got to know that the issue of debt is an issue of power, a power that is being exercised on African youth by imperialistic sort of interests through local agents, and I emphasize mostly political agents. So the conversations that we've been having for the last 3 days have really had one major key issue coming out, that there is need for citizen participation in some of these conversations, or some of these things that are happening. And for us at Youth for Tax Justice Network, we believe that an average African is a young person. So if we're talking about citizen participation, we're talking about youth participation. And for us, I think, and one of the takeaways from this conference is that we have, as young people, to participate actively, first as we work to counter local agents of some of these interests, especially political agents. So I think we should not be shy about this, that for any political system or ideology that doesn't put the development and benefit of young people at the center of its its agenda, then we don't have a use for it. And I think as young people, we can mobilize and do something. We had conversations recently with the SADC Youth Forum, and the issue of Zambia came up, how they were able to mobilize and change leadership. And I think that's where we have to begin, and that's where we have to start from as young people, that we have to take back the power that these interests have been exercising over us through our local leaders who have been acting as agents. Secondly, is that as we participate to hold governments accountable, I think what has also been coming up is the issue of creditors' responsibility. That the idea that as we exercise, let me not call it oversight, but it could still be oversight over governments to prudently borrow money to invest in sectors that benefit young people. We must also look at lenders that are not really responsible when they're lending to our governments. And that brings me to the idea of odious debt, that as young people, we have to start strongly talking about debt that has been accrued, that has not benefited us, and put out a firm message and demand that we should not pay that debt. And for a creditor, for a lender who gives out that debt irresponsibly, should not expect that young people should pay this money. So I think it has also, come out in some of the conversations that we've had in the last 3 days, that for young people to engage in holding our governments accountable, being transparent, we must also hold lenders accountable. And we must reject any debt that is accrued on our behalf that has not benefited us. If you're to borrow money, you should borrow money that should be for the benefit of young people. So for us, and I think what we're taking from this and the new debt movement is that first we should be able to say no to pay. I know there are costs, and economists who say all these things, but countries have tried and they've successfully managed to renegotiate some of these debt that were given and were not used for the benefit of people. There is Argentina, there's Ecuador, and we can have some of those conversations. But the idea here is that if resources got on our behalf and are not used on our behalf, then I think it's time not to just renegotiate, not to just cancel, but to just refuse to say, as a lender, as a creditor, you have responsibility to us, the people that are taking some of these resources. And then maybe lastly, again, I will come back to this, that it's an issue of power. It's an issue of politics, that we have as young people to be in control of our political processes, because most of these decisions are made there. And we've seen some of that movement happen in Kenya. We saw the movement around rejecting the IMF debt. And the effect of that was that before IMF approved Uganda's debt, it had to call civil society to talk to us, to tell us, you know what, look here, this is the money that we are going to give. These are some of the safeguards we've put, even though there were not enough safeguards to limit abuse. But it was a starting point that pressure in Kenya caused some changes in terms of transparency within Uganda. So we have to start there. We have to participate actively within our political spaces to make sure that decisions about debt, decisions about resource mobilization, are decisions that benefit young people. And it's for two reasons. One, we benefit the most if we can raise resources to invest in young people, because again, like I said, from 2017, there has been that narrative that the only way we will benefit from Africa's young population is if we invest in sectors that make it productive. If we give it, or if we give them access to cheap finance for their businesses, if we give them an education that can make them compete globally, but also to put in the infrastructure that will help them compete at a global market. So for us, as Youth for Tax Justice Network, and I think as young people of the continent, we are coming out with three major ways of moving forward that we are going to encourage young people to actively participate in political processes, because debt is a political issue, it's a power issue, so we have to be part of that power. Then secondly is that we are going to, and as we've been doing, advocate for sustainable ways of internally raising resources, and those resources being allocated and utilized for the benefit of young people, and mainly through fair and just taxation. And then, of course, thirdly is that we want to put the spotlight back to the lenders, that as we have these conversations, that the bank does not stop from us getting resources. The bank also has to go and stop with the person giving those resources. If they do it responsibly, I think it's high time that young people refuse to pay odious debt. That it's not just about asking that they cancel, no, because that one would be at their mercy. The idea is that we should say, no, we are not going to pay because you lent people money that you knew very well that they're not going to use it for the benefit of young people. So basically that is it. And I am hopeful, and I believe that we'll have some meaningful movement on this. Thank you very much.
Allan, I like what you've said about young people and being able to participate in the political process, holding power to account, being part of the conversations, and really at the forefront of looking at solutions, even as we look at how to recover out of the pandemic. So as countries begin to build out of the pandemic, we know that the continent has struggled in mobilizing its own financial resources, especially when it comes to increasing their tax base. In the last 1 year, the pandemic has had such a huge economic impact that it put governments in a very difficult position where they looked at, having tax breaks and also just giving businesses the support and cushions that they need to be able to survive really during that pandemic. I remember just a couple of months ago, there's a lot of debate on taxing possibly digital companies, Western countries, looking at how they can increase their revenues, their country revenues. In Nigeria, they shut down Twitter, which cost the country millions of dollars, because a number of young people are online and are conducting businesses online. So when we look at the tax burden as well as the debt burden, because a number of African countries and the citizens themselves feel like they're already overtaxed, but also we have a huge informal sector that isn't in the formal tax-based system. How can we balance the two between tax and the debt burden so that it doesn't rob young people of the opportunities to transform the continent and just contribute economically to the continent?
Thank you very much. And I think it was someone, I think it must have been Crystal or someone who said that these challenges didn't start with the COVID crisis. These have been there. But the good thing is that even the solutions have been there. I think we've been talking about changing or reforming our, for example, tax incentive regimes to see to it that companies, multinational companies that don't need resources, don't need those breaks, don't get those breaks. And I think that is the starting point, that most of these solutions actually have been available, have been around, but we've not seen them translate into implementation, again, because of the issue of the politics in it, the question of political participation, that there is no consequence. For example, if a company is given a holiday worth millions and people are taxed to make up for that holiday. So, and again, it goes back to the question of participation that we've been talking about, especially of young people. And you rightly talked about digital service taxes that eventually would have fallen back to the way African countries were trying to implement them, meant that they were letting off these big companies, the Facebooks, off the hook and transferring that tax to the common young person. And yet if, for example, African countries collectively demanded that, you know what, if you're Facebook and you have Facebook users in Uganda, you have Facebook users in Botswana, you derive value from just having those users, and therefore pay a certain amount to some of these countries because of that value, even though you don't look at issues of advertising income, even though you don't look at issues of, but just the fact that you have users and those users create value and content, then you have to give some bit of payment. So I think for me, it goes back to the fact that some of these conversations have been happening, issues of transparency in sharing information, country-to-country reporting, beneficial ownership registers. But the challenge has always been that these solutions have been proposed, but we've not seen our political class move on to make changes, either because they are complicit, they are corrupt, they are part of some of this, or because there is no sanction, there is no risk that if I do not act, then nothing's going to happen to me. I also want to talk about the issue of the formal, because most of even the tax, for example, the tax relief that was suggested during the COVID-19 went mostly to the formal sector. And we know that there are very many young people, for example, that are not within that sector. So even those ones, I think that is a little bit of diversionary. I would want to think that we should look where the money is with these multinational companies. That's where the money is. And I usually use an example that in Uganda, in just one tax case, Uganda was able to recover about 400 and something million US dollars in just one transaction. They taxed one transaction. So we usually ask how many people downtown would you have to tax and over how long to get 400 and I think it was 460 something million US dollars from one transaction. So I think it goes back to looking for the money where it is, closing our tax loopholes within double taxation agreements, within creative accounting, within that incentives regime, so that we get the money where it is. And it doesn't stop at mobilization. And that's why for us to look at mobilization, allocation, and utilization, that we can raise resources, but still not allocate them for the benefit of the citizens or for the benefit of young people. We may allocate them, but not utilize them the way we want them to be utilized to benefit young people. So again, for us, I think we've realized that most of these are actually political issues. We are engaging youth that are usually major mobilizers within political parties to make sure that the issue of domestic resource mobilization is at the core of most of these political party ideologies, that it doesn't matter whether you're in government or not. As a political party, if you cannot articulate a position on how you raise resources to finance your development agenda, then you have no business being a political party. You have no business trying to aspire to lead people. So that is the work that we've started, to have conversations within these political parties to ask the hard questions, that where are we going to raise resources from? Are we going to borrow? Are we going to close loopholes within our tax systems and laws so that more people pay their fair share of tax, so that in that case, no one has to pay a lot? Are we going to keep relying on foreign aid in debt? And all these conversations. And we're having them with political parties, so that at the end of the day, any political party that cannot have a strategy on how to sustainably internally raise resources, it has no business governing, it has no business being leadership, because domestic resource mobilization goes beyond just having resources to invest in young people. It goes to issues of sovereignty. It goes to issues of not being told what to do just because you're expecting people to give you money. It goes to issues of independence, issues of identity. So we've started that work. We believe that's where we should, because I think a lot of good work has been done in terms of research, in terms of proposing solutions, in terms of seeing to it that we move this continent to the next level. The only challenge is that we've been having local collaborators, local political agents for some of these multinational interests and imperialist interests that have made it difficult for us to benefit from our resources. And that's why we're starting the work to see to it that every young African knows that this is the problem and this is what we have to do about it.
To read and sign the Harare Declaration, go to www.afrodat.org/initiatives. Click on Afrodat Conference on Data and Development and then read more. And finally, the outcome statement.